Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking about a new startup that aims to solve the podcasting industry's monetization problem. Agnes Cazzero knows a thing or two about helping content creators monetize their content. In 2013, she and a co-founder launched FameBit, a platform that helped YouTubers match with brands that were willing to sponsor their videos. The company was so successful that it was eventually acquired by YouTube in 2016. This year, Cazzero and that same co-founder are launching Podcorn, a platform designed to help podcasters monetize their shows. Like FameBit, it will serve as an online marketplace where brands can post RFPs for projects and be matched with participating podcasters. I interviewed Cazzero about why such a platform is needed, how the current podcast advertising landscape is flawed, and why podcasters with small to mid-sized audiences currently have such a difficult time finding sponsors. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about my email newsletter. If you're not subscribed, then you're missing out on some of the most in-depth analysis on the media industry that you'll find anywhere. Last week, for instance, I published a 1,500-word article about how publishers like BuzzFeed are transforming native advertising in order to scale their revenue. If you're not subscribed, then you should pause this episode right now and go to simonowens.substack.com to sign up. But don't just take my word for it. Here's Fordham University journalism professor Phil Torino talking about why he enjoys my newsletter.
Someone like myself that has a keen interest in news and in the business of media would definitely need to read in order to stay, abreast of what's happening. So there's the part about the content you aggregate. There's the sharing of your own work, which also provides, really good context and analysis to, what's happening in the field, in the industry, and then also with the items that you actually break a bit of news on as well. So it combines both of those well, the aggregation and also context and analysis to whatever is happening.
Again, if you want to subscribe, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Okay, now let's jump to my interview with Podcorn's Agnes Cazzero. Hey, Agnes, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So we're eventually going to start talking about this new podcast-focused company you started. But I wanted to start and just give people a little bit of an idea of your background and your previous work, because I think it kind of really informs, what you guys are doing with podcasting. You co-founded a company called FameBit. What is FameBit?
Sure. So FameBit is a marketplace that connects YouTube stars and brands for branded content. My co-founder and I had started that company in 2013. And in 2016, we were acquired by Google. So that company is now part of YouTube and is thriving there.
And you were really young when you started that company, right?
Not very young. I mean, I was.
I guess it's all relative. You were you were just out of college, maybe?
Yeah, well, actually, I was in law school and I had just started law school when I started the company. So I have a law background. I kind of ventured into accidentally, I suppose. Prior to FameBit, I had founded a subscription commerce company while I was a law student, sort of as a side hustle. And because I was a broke student and I had no money for marketing, but I was watching a ton of YouTube, I decided to send my product to a bunch of YouTubers. And that turned out to be wildly successful because within 3 months, I saw a 20x return on my little investment. And so that kind of a light bulb went on and I saw an opportunity that other businesses would want to work with these creators but had no way of doing it, and also saw how manual and tedious the process was of trying to figure out how to find the creators, how to contact them. And my co-founder at the time, and then who is my co-founder currently, had co-founded a different company, and we sort of said, if you quit what I'm doing, then I'll quit. Then I'll quit what I'm doing, and let's do this company together. And so we did. And we got accepted to 500 startups. That was sort of our first venture, because we're both Canadian, so we ventured out to the US to do this. and yeah, and it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and you guys were kind of solving a problem that you're now, and we'll get to this with the podcasting, but you're kind of now solving with podcasting. Is you were kind of tackling some inefficiencies in the markets, and that YouTube had a partnership program, but it depended on what niche you were in and what kind of scale you had to where you could make real money on it. So a lot of YouTubers were turning to brand partnerships, but there wasn't like really a good way for them to connect with the brands so that they could hook up for these kind of one-to-one kind of partnerships, right? That was kind of the situation you guys were entering into.
Yeah, so there was a lot of sort of multi-channel networks and agencies that were focusing on creating content in-house and providing some opportunities to the talent, but they were basically feeding opportunities to the largest creators. And on the brand side, it was also harder for brands, let's say like startups, to work with creators because you needed really large budgets to work with a network. So we saw an opportunity to create a marketplace, and also, in terms of like pre-roll ads and AdSense for creators, we saw that majority of the creators that were monetizing off of that were really large talent because it's so heavily based on impressions. Smaller creators didn't have a way to monetize, so that's how Fame came to its existence.
So, and kind of like the issue was is like brands really liked these intimate experiences and were even willing to go to smaller YouTubers that didn't necessarily have like a million subscribers, but because those small YouTubers, because they were kind of, by definition, they didn't have staffs. It was like they didn't have an ad sales team, so they needed kind of like a marketplace. Is that kind of a correct assessment of how it looked, what it looked like in the YouTube community?
Yeah, so essentially, YouTubers were independent creators. They were already creating the content on their own. And because as a small business, I was interacting with them directly, I saw that they were savvy enough and wanted to price themselves and wanted to kind of dictate their own terms of working with brands because they were in the best position to do so. I mean, they know what it takes to create quality content. They are the ones creating it. They're coming up with the ideas. So it felt fair that they should be the one deciding how they collaborate with brands and with which brands. And so, yeah, it made sense that there should be a marketplace where they're getting to choose who they work with. They are sending their own proposals, they're pricing themselves and collaborating directly.
And so the platform allowed like a brand to kind of create like almost like a request for a proposal where they would have their, whatever thing they were trying to sell, what their KPIs are, and then they could be matched up with a YouTuber who was within their niche, or somehow, they could, like a YouTuber could kind of bid for that project, or something to that effect, right?
Exactly. YouTubers would send proposals to brands that they were interested in working with because the brands would post their campaigns on FameBit. And then once they were hired, they could collaborate in a secure and safe workroom. The money would be held in escrow. And then once it would be completed for brand safety, brands would have the opportunity to review the content. And then once they would approve it to be published to YouTube, that's when we would pay out the creators the money.
And then FameBit was eventually acquired by Google, and you worked for them for a period of time. What was it like to go from a startup to working, in this huge company?
Right. I mean, yeah. So I was at Google almost 2 years, and definitely challenging. I mean, I think an acquisition in and of itself is challenging for any founder because, even for us, the due diligence process was lengthy, and we couldn't share with everyone on the team, and we had a very transparent culture. So there's just difficulties around the process of going through an acquisition, but at the same time, once you get integrated, it's also very different because you're getting plugged into a much bigger machine, and you kind of have also the paradox of choice of what you're going to plug into first and who you're going to work with to have the most effective integration. But we were very successful. FameBit is very much thriving under YouTube, so it's been a great experience. And from a founder perspective, you learn not only, when you're building your own company, you learn how to build and grow a company, but then you kind of learn how to scale and the pains of that, and working with a lot more people. So
What were you able to do with the product once you had the larger resources of Google behind it, and also obviously you were working with YouTubers, and now you had kind of the brand of YouTube behind you. Did that like allow you to scale at a much quicker rate, or like what could you do that you couldn't do before? Do you feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, scale to much more advertisers, also much more creators because it was YouTube. So any other creators that we possibly didn't have on FameBit, we were able to very quickly scale into that, and also plug into more analytics as well.
So you left Google in 2018, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
At least
Yes.
that's what it said on
Yes.
said on LinkedIn, February
Yeah.
2018. So you launched this new company, Podcorn, several months later. Walk me through how this idea came about for this company, and kind of the steps that led to where you are today. With I think you guys recently launched it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we stumbled on this idea is basically we looked at podcasting, we saw it thriving, but we saw a lot of similar trends unfolding that we saw in the early days of video. So, for instance, there's now a lot of content. There's over 700,000 podcasts, but 85% of them still don't monetize. So there's a huge opportunity there, and we saw that also on the brand side, the problem is even more fragmented than the early days of video because there is no single ad network like a YouTube where first and foremost like podcasters can monetize just off of ads, but where also brands can go and find podcasters and contact them directly, even through a manual process. So on that end, the problem is much bigger that we saw. And again, like the opportunities for monetization for podcasters through ads are very much kind of traditional dynamic ad insertions, whether it be pre-roll, mid, or post-roll. So we saw an opportunity to actually make brands part of the conversation versus just traditional ads where for podcasters, the opportunities to monetize are not just based on impressions, but they're based on other factors such as the type of content they're creating or what their expertise is in an area. And we're using machine learning to match both sides.
Yeah, I want to kind of dig into some of these things. So, like YouTube and podcasting are a little different in the sense that
Yeah.
YouTube has captured a huge part of the market, and they were, and it was like everything was played through YouTube so that they could introduce like a partner program and it could scale all across YouTube. Whereas like podcasting is more fragmented. Like Apple Podcasts, it has like 50% of the market, but it's not trying to do the same thing YouTube was doing, and it's not really helping podcasters monetize at all. It's kind of like a benevolent, overseer of
Right.
it. There are some smaller players like Anchor that are allowing people to opt in to their networks that are kind of like YouTube's partner program, but they only have like 1 or 2% of the podcast market. So in some ways, this is a slightly. Do you think this is a slightly more difficult place to move into because it's a little bit more fragmented than the YouTube, where the YouTube was just kind of this one universal platform where everything was the same regardless for who was on it in terms of like the functionality, the analytics, different stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's more necessarily difficult. I think because it's more difficult, also the opportunity is bigger. So even from an inventory perspective of podcasters to brands, there's podcasters are very eager to monetize in the right way. So I think from that perspective, the opportunity is huge, and because the focus has very much been on dynamically inserted more traditional ads, even if host read, not very well like integrated into the content. There's really an opportunity to centralize monetization in a much bigger way than with video, and provide a lot more creative ad formats and bring more ease of use and really truly build liquidity within this space. So yeah, I think from definitely like an analytics standpoint, because there's many distribution channels, there's a lot of challenges, but I think that's the exciting opportunity is that you can really build something super unique here.
I go to, I follow the industry closely. I've gone to various conferences, right, for podcasting. Based on what I've heard, is like if you're an independent podcaster and you want to sell advertising, you want to try to make it into one of these podcast networks like mid-roll, but that they're prohibitively hard to get into in the sense that you need to have like at least 50,000
Right.
downloads per episode. Is that have you found that to be true with most of the existing podcast networks out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the problem with the traditional ad format is that is very heavily based on impressions. So it doesn't account for your topics or the evergreen nature of content and all these other factors that make creators really great. And through our experience in video, we saw how much better native converts for brands because they are being part of that content. So with podcasting, creative formats for native advertising have not been defined yet. When you look at YouTube, you had lookbooks, hauls, tutorials, unboxings, reviews, all this type of content that brands can be integrated into natively. With podcasting, that doesn't exist. Right now, it is very much based on sort of like how much monthly downloads do you get and are you eligible for traditional ads because are you going to drive enough impressions for brands. So what we want to do is actually provide ways where brands can even be part of an interview, like kind of like you and I are doing, where it's much more inquisitive. It's not just pushing products, but both podcasters and brands get to create something really unique together. And that in and of itself will make a lot more podcasters eligible for that and I think it'll be a lot more valuable to brands too because they're not going to be disruptive to the listener.
So, like with your platform, you're really kind of allowing the podcaster who has this super loyal audience of, let's say, like 5 to 10,000 listeners who don't have enough like an audience to get into these big ad networks. But right now, they've either had to do all their own ad sales or they just have turned to Patreon or something like that to monetize.
So essentially, the platform is for everyone, but we're definitely mindful of the independent and smaller podcasters. So you exactly kind of to your point, it's not so much about how much listeners you have, but how engaged they are with your content and what your niche is. So for instance, if let's say you are a podcaster that talks, you're an expert at getting e-commerce businesses off the ground. So you have interviewers that are within that space, or you talk about topics within that. You might partner with a brand who is, let's say, a shipping solutions company for e-commerce brands, and you might talk about like best resources for getting an e-commerce business off the ground. So that right there is a lot more um, it's a better fit for both the brand and the podcaster. So even though you might not have 50,000 downloads, you're talking about a topic that the brand's industry inherently cares about. So it's much more well fitted, if that makes sense.
Can you walk me through the process of using Podcorn, both from a podcaster side and the brand side?
Yeah, so the way it's going to work is that a brand would sign up to Podcorn. They'll create also a campaign and they'll pick different creative ad formats that they are interested in. And then we will match podcasters based on different criteria to the opportunities. And once they are matched, they can send audio proposals to the brands, and the brands get to see who sent them proposals, what they're offering to do. And once they decide to hire a bunch of podcasters, the platform is basically made for scale. So we're encouraging, not just hire one super big podcaster, but many, so that you can spread your message and in different formats across different podcasts. And then once hired, the podcaster and brand get to collaborate together in our workroom, and similarly to FameBit, the money will be held in escrow throughout the duration of the campaign. But obviously, there are a lot of different factors because there's a lot more distribution channels and the content's different. But once the content is approved by the brand, it gets distributed to the agreed upon platforms.
When you say work together in your workroom, is that like a Slack channel or something where they're just bantering around ideas of like what the podcaster could possibly say or offering up scripts, or like what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a safe place to exchange information, to ask additional questions, to see the calendar and be able to follow on like when things are going to be released. And yeah, it's basically a way for them to keep track of everything going on in the campaign.
Are these more for, like, obviously dynamic insertion is starting to kind of become more prevalent,
Mhm.
but like a lot of independent podcasters don't have that kind of sophistication to where they can really do that. Is this more kind of the old school, like you read an ad and then it's on that episode for perpetuity, or like how does dynamic insertion, like dynamic ads, do they play a part in any of this in terms of like the bidding process or anything like that?
No, so we're actually not doing dynamic insertions for the reasons that we feel that it's more disruptive to the listener and it's less effective for the brand, because the content that is placed dynamically is usually not related at all to what the podcast content is about. So what we're doing is a lot more natively integrated in the sense that it does live forever in the content, but it's not necessarily sort of how you said, a script where the host reads a script. It's created much more collaboratively. So it could be an interview where the brand appears actually on the podcast. It could be a roundtable discussion with a bunch of expert podcasters within the brand's field, and they're being mentioned in a very native way that matches the content. Or it could be a brand series, or an audiobook trailer or review and things like that. So it's much more native content than just ads that don't relate to what the podcaster is talking about. And it does live on the podcast forever.
And one thing that, like, ad buyers kind of struggle with is that they need scale.
Mhm.
It's not worth it to them to, spend time with like one. I mean, some obviously smaller advertisers, it is worth it, but like the larger ones, like to have to deal with a bunch of small podcasters that only have, 5,000 listeners, like they want to be able to buy about against like 30 of those podcasts. Does the tool offer anything that allows them to scale in that way, or is it going to be more one-to-one interactions?
So the point of the platform is that it allows you to collaborate with many podcasters at scale, and the platform's designed to make it easy for you to work with many. And in that sense, you could do a lot of different things. Like you could do some post read ads, you could do some things that are more integrated. And the idea is that you work with a mix of podcasters, not necessarily like all small or like one or two large, but you get a diverse mix and you actually get to integrate into topics that relate to your podcast. So how hands-on the brands want to get, that's up to them and the podcasters. They can negotiate that, but it's very much so it's designed for scale in the way that you work with the podcasters, but it is very much a one-to-one relationship. But you can hire podcasters on a calendar basis, so buy them out for several months in advance. So once you agree to sort of like what it is that they're doing for you, it becomes a lot easier.
And you guys are kind of using machine learning, right? Like in the sense of like the
Mhm.
podcaster doesn't just have to spend all day on your platform looking for possible brands to bid for. Like they could be working on their own direct ad sales during their free time, and then you
Exactly.
guys like are emailing them when a brand that they might want to bid for. Like, is that how it works? Like, do they set a minimum that they would work for? They say what their audience is, what their demographic is, and then like how are you making things more efficient in terms of matching the brands with the podcasters?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things we obviously learned with ThinkBit and doing videos, how important proper matchmaking is, and ensuring that one, the podcasters don't have to look through, hundreds of brand campaigns that might not be relevant to what it is that they're working on, or what they're looking at pricing themselves. So we're matching them based on certain criteria so that they can see very relevant opportunities. And also for brands, likewise, we want to ensure that they're getting relevant proposals from the podcasters. So it's basically to streamline everything and not waste a lot of time and ensure for podcasters that they have a really higher rate, because we want to, at the end of the day, we want to ensure a very healthy balance within the marketplace and ensure that both sides are very happy.
So have you guys officially launched?
So we have not launched, but podcasters and brands can sign up right now at podcorn.fm, where basically they can sign up for early access. We're doing beta testing now, and we're launching in Q4 of this year to the public.
So what are you doing like right now to bring them to the table? Like, are you meeting with podcasters directly and meeting with brands and trying to have some pilot examples like right out the bat when you launch, or like what's that system looking like leading up to the launch?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working with a bunch of brand partners and podcasters on sort of early partnerships and early campaigns that we're definitely leveraging sort of as case studies to show the market of its effectiveness. And we're not ready to unveil those yet, but yeah, we definitely have a few exciting things in the works that will be pretty awesome to unveil
Uh-huh.
shortly.
What's typically needed from the podcaster from an analytics perspective? Like the advantage you had with YouTuber is that with YouTubers is that some of the analytics were public, so you could see how many subscribers the YouTuber had, and you could see how many views each video had. And then even on the back end, obviously because YouTube was a all-in-one platform, like all the back end analytics were standardized and they could get pretty granular. Whereas with podcasting, you might be using Anchor, you might be using Libsyn, like you might using different hosts.
Right.
Different platforms give you different access to different analytics. How do you kind of verify and report for like what kind of systems do you have in place so that these brands know that like if a person says they have 5,000 downloads per episode that they can actually verify that?
Yeah, so we're definitely pulling accurate information on sort of like the standard analytics that are available on podcasters, like in terms of like how many downloads and listens they get. We have our engineering team working right now around the clock to figure out how we can get a lot more granular. But I think like our core focus with launch is to really show the value of native content creation and show the value of podcasters regardless or irrespective of their number of downloads, because like one of the things we also learned through video is that you can't measure everything, and a lot of the aspects of doing native is that you're you know getting brand ambassadors and you're creating a lot of like you're building a lot of brand affinity, so there's certain things that you can't measure for, but we're definitely mindful of getting granular analytics for brands in order especially for them to like when it comes to campaign results. But that is just hasn't been our core focus. We really want to focus on providing that the liquidity in the marketplace and the opportunities to both sides.
Do you think, because that's like a big challenge that even Instagram or like influencers are still dealing with, is the verification part? Like, you think that's going to be a huge piece of the puzzle and a huge challenge?
Yeah, I definitely think it's very important piece to the puzzle. Absolutely, like you say, and we are working on getting very granular, so we'll definitely get there. It's just like right now the opportunity, like the gap in monetization is so huge that we really want to focus on really just showing the value of native and of all these channels. So that's our first and
Do
foremost.
you think, I mean, obviously this is you predicting, but do you think a lot of the early adopters will be direct response advertising where they could give like a discount code or something so they say had that at least some level of measurement of the ROI of their ad spend?
Yeah, I think that probably is very true. I mean, even with our other platform, we definitely had a lot of direct response advertisers, but I think a lot of brands care about how like the niche of the channel and like the expertise of the creator and depending on what their vertical is. So yeah, I definitely think direct response is big, but as I said, like I think there's a lot of sophisticated advertisers now that understand that have worked with creators in video and Instagram, and they're understanding the value of native content beyond just sort of like direct attribution. And and what it means to align yourself with another expert's message who already has a very dedicated and loyal audience, and just the value of that in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Is your long-term ambition just to be a marketplace for podcasters to connect with advertisers? I could see other kind of synergies where you could connect podcasters with producers or interview guests, or create some kind of membership platform on top of this where people can donate. Or do you feel like you want to swim in this specific lane of advertiser and content producer?
Yeah, so we definitely want to become the leading marketplace, and sort of like you said, whether it be opportunities to have interviewers like guests on your show, or whether like whatever ways that we want to open it up, obviously to learn from the community. And we're very open to shaping in new ways, and adding new creative ad formats, but we definitely want to stick within the marketplace and continue to build out tools to scale efficiency around that. So whether it is building more internet native tools for distribution, where it becomes easier to promote the content that you're doing with the advertiser on Podcorn, that those are the things that we really want to focus on, and just building a lot of liquidity. So our goal is to, obviously we're starting our work with independent podcasters. We're definitely going to branch out international. There's a lot of opportunities, obviously, in the Asian markets where podcasting is already very big, and then so we definitely want to have a lot of global ambitions, but a lot of it is going to be based around building more tools for efficiency.
Podcast adoptions has so far outpaced the advertising revenue. I don't even think the podcast market has cracked $1 billion yet. Do you think it's because there aren't enough scalable solutions like this where advertisers can buy across a wider range of shows that don't have more than 50,000 listeners?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the problem. I think it's a lot of things are coming together. Like right now, obviously, listenership has seen the fastest growth it has ever. Like I think right now, over 50% of Americans have now listened to a podcast, or over 140 million Americans, to put it another way. So listenership is growing very quickly. There's more. I think content is getting to a tipping point of being absolutely amazing and engaging. And so I think there's all these factors that, and brands are now, even through initial studies, are seeing that podcasting is converting even better than video. So I think all of those things are lining up for advertisers to see this as a great medium. And audio in general, it's such a natural medium to us. I mean, we've been listening long before we were even reading. So it's very intimate. I think it can take intimacy to another level. For advertisers specifically, it provides a lot more real estate than even video, because with video you get excited about being integrated into 2 minutes of content, but with podcasting, on average, a podcast is 30 minutes, and 80% of listeners listen to a majority of a podcast. So that's really special for advertisers, and creates a lot of room for collaboration. So I think all these things that advertisers are seeing are making podcasts very valuable to them. But yeah, the tools have not been there. There hasn't been an easy way to find the channels. It's been the podcast, so it's been very difficult from a collaborative standpoint, which is why we see such a huge opportunity here for a marketplace like ours.
Okay, Agnes, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Agnes Kazera on Twitter, and Podcorn.fm if they would like to sign up.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.